Hi there, welcome back to our series in Ecclesiastes. Today it's episode 6, chapter 6. I'm going to start just before though, at the end of chapter 5, and you'll see why just now. What you get at the end of chapter 5 and the beginning of chapter 6 sit really well together. And let me show you what was the giveaway for me. Have a look at chapter 5, verse 18. This is what I have observed to be good, says the teacher. And then he tells us some stuff. And then at the beginning of chapter 6, verse 1, I have seen another evil under the sun. So he says at the end of chapter 5, here's what I've seen which is good. But then beginning of chapter 6, but I've seen something else that is not good. Those two things contrast each other, as well as complement each other, as we're about to find out. And the rest of chapter 6 helps make sense of that for us. So that's what I want to do. I want to have a look today at what the teacher sees that is good and what the teacher sees that is not good, and how that can help us as we work our way through this book and as we seek to live lives for Jesus. So let's have a look what it is that he sees that is good. Chapter 5, verse 18. It's appropriate for a person to eat and to drink and to find satisfaction in their labour under the sun during the few days of life that God has given them, for this is their lot. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and to be happy in their toil, this is a gift from God. They seldom reflect on the days of their life because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart. So here's what he sees that is good. He sees some people have wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them. Now, if you have one without the other, it's not much good to you, is it? But if you get both at the same time, he says, this is good. He recognises that we still live life which is full of frustration. Interestingly, he calls work our toilsome labour. Work is still frustrating, but there are moments that you can enjoy. And there are moments where the result of your work and the consequence of it will get you to sit back and you can enjoy the results of a hard day's work. And he looks at it and he says, that's good. That's something worth having. In fact, 3 times he says this doesn't come because of your best efforts, but in fact, this comes because it's a gift from God. Verse 18, God has given it to you. Verse 19, God gives someone these things. And then again at the end of verse 19, this is a gift of God. So it's not reason to pat ourselves on the back. It's reason to look at God and be thankful to him. Even in life under the sun, with all this hevel, all this meaningless and frustration, God still gives good gifts and we can enjoy them. That's what he's seen that is good. Verse 20 is a little bit tricky to know exactly what he's shooting for. They seldom reflect on the days of their life because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart. It could probably mean one of two things. It probably means that you don't worry about the trouble of life when you're enjoying work and the good consequences of it, because you're occupied with a happy heart because of the gift that God has given you. In that case, it's a positive thing. There's also a little bit of an element of being an ostrich with your head in the sand. It doesn't fix the world. It doesn't fix all our problems, but at least it distracts you so you can enjoy something in the meantime. Could mean that. Or it could mean something a little more sinister, verse 20. It could mean that money is both a blessing and a curse. Makes life a little easier, but you'll be so busy enjoying the good things of it that you will never think to look beyond that enjoyment and to investigate and consider life the way the teacher is. It'll keep you blind to the real things that are going on. I guess that's how Jesus talks often when he says to his disciples after a conversation with a rich man, how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. Verse 20 could be a little nudge in that direction too. Either way, even when the teacher sees something good, which we can rejoice in, there is still a twist in the tail. Even when life is good, he's saying, it's not great. So that's the first thing he sees. Let's have a look at the second thing he sees. Chapter 6, verse 1. I've seen an evil under the sun too, and it weighs heavily on mankind. God gives some people wealth, possessions, and honour so that they lack nothing their hearts desire, but God doesn't grant them the ability to enjoy them. Some people have everything they could possibly dream of, and yet they are still not happy. That is a great evil. That does lead to a terrible burden, doesn't it? Some people get the prosperity and the joy. Other people chase prosperity and get no joy at all. And he says this is meaningless, a grievous evil. Have a look at verse 3. He tells us a brief little story. It's the story of a man who has it all and yet has no joy. A man may have 100 children and live many years. You'd be envious of this guy, right? Yet no matter how long he lives, he cannot enjoy his prosperity and he does not receive a proper burial. He says, if that is you, then guess what? He says, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. It's a rough illustration. It's a distressing image that he drops at our feet here in verse 4, 5 and 6. His point is, if you were to live a life like this man that I've just described, then you'd be better off never having been born. That's how much of a burden prosperity with no joy is. And the sad truth is that describes so many people in our world today. It might, at times, even describe you. You get everything your heart desires, and yet you're still not happy. In verse 7, he goes on, I think, to point us in the direction of why that is. Verse 7, everyone's toil is for their mouth, yet their appetite is never satisfied. And then again in verse 9, better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite, because this too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What he's talking about there is unfulfilled desire. He's talking that we want and want and want, yet we are never satisfied. And that's the problem. Why you can work really hard. You can even get all the stuff you want, and yet you will still get no joy. It's because of this misunderstood desire, this unsatisfied appetite. And that, beyond all the stuff that we look for happiness, that, I think the teacher is saying, is where to go to find the root cause of all of our unhappiness. In fact, it makes me think very much of a New Testament passage. I've been checking it out this week, and it took me to James chapter 1. James chapter 1 says in verse 14, James writes, each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own desire and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's fully grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived. I think that's a pretty parallel New Testament passage to what the teacher is warning us here in Ecclesiastes. He looks at what he sees and is good. He looks at what he sees and is not good. And he says, don't be deceived. Even having all the stuff you want isn't the answer to getting what you really want. Don't be tricked by the desires of your heart, because they'll never be satisfied. You know, the Disney motto, your heart is good. Follow your heart. It will give you what you want. What a wicked motto to inflict upon our children. The teacher would say, meaningless, meaningless. That kind of talk is utterly meaningless for child and adult alike. And it's a warning that we've got to take seriously. It's a warning here that he arrives at by contrasting these two things that he's seen at the end of chapter 5 and the beginning of chapter 6. Well, he gets to the end of this chapter, and whether you know it or not, well done, you've reached halfway through the book. There are 12 chapters in Ecclesiastes. We're at the end of chapter 6. You're halfway there. Well done for hanging in. But look at how this chapter ends. It ends with 3 questions. You'll see it there from verse 11. The more the words, the less the meaning. How does that profit anyone? Question 1. Question 2. For who knows what is good for a person in life during the few and meaningless days that they have? It's question 2. And question 3. Who can tell them what will happen under the sun after they're gone? Well, they're 3 very poignant questions, aren't they? Questions that we may often try to avoid, but the teacher won't let us. He puts them right back on the agenda. You might want to have a think about those before we get back together next time. Next time, we're going to move into chapter 7. And in chapter 7, the teacher pushes right back into wisdom. And he says, let's look at wisdom again. And let's see if the answers to our questions lie there. And if they do, then to what extent can we get the answers that we need? Well, I'll leave that with you for now, and I look forward to seeing you again